Hey, it's Aaron, Metal Theologian. Alright, so we're going to talk about something a little bit different today. This is going to be about some old German bands on this really obscure label called Pyramid Records. But part of the story about the Pyramid Records label is that, well, it's fake. So, at least I think it's fake. There are people out there who disagree with me. The impetus actually was for, okay, so there were these records that came out on CD, actually, on CD only at the time, because it was the mid-90s, but it was a label called Sci-Fi, and Sci was spelled P-S-I, like sci-fi, like the Greek thing, so not a bad name for, a little psychedelic label or a cosmic music label, right? And they put out 2 batches of 3 CDs that were ostensibly by these old, German things that were, really obscure, just, these impossibly obscure, old, German bands. And even at the time they came out, there were some things about them that looked a little bit suspicious, like no specific dates, no really clear names on any of the, in any of the credits or anything like that. There were a couple that were names that were kind of close to people, so maybe there was a little bit of plausibility potentially, but not really, And most importantly, no one had ever heard of these things. Now, this was in the mid '90s. Was really when I was sort of at my peak as far as getting into this old German shit. And you could only get CDs at the time, so I had all that shit on CD, and I've since upgraded pretty much everything to record, I'm happy to say. Not necessarily originals, but it's a lot easier to get reissues of shit now, too. I have a few originals of things I just couldn't get. Anyway, beside the point. The point is, I was as dedicated to the shit as I ever have been in my life. I wanted to hear fucking everything, I mean, if there were things that were a little bit too folky, like some of the Holland stuff was a little bit, a little bit wimpy for me. MTD is another one where... they're pretty highly regarded by a lot of other people, but they're just kind of soft for my taste. But generally speaking, if something was obscure and something was heavy and something was weird, or actually if something was any one of those things, I needed to hear it, you know what I mean? And I sort of qualify that because a lot of these aren't necessarily that heavy, but they definitely scratch the weirdness itch. So when I first saw these myself, I sort of balked, but then not too long after that, I was sort of like, fuck it, I really want to hear them anyway, and I went and bought them all, So there are 3 that came out and then 3 more, sort of arbitrarily, it seems in retrospect. Now the story was that this was shit that had been, produced in, these microscopic quantities, supposedly, between, 50 and 100 is what they were saying, which... isn't really that tiny because there are a lot of 100 runs out there that are older than these where at least 1 copy has turned up. There are test pressings of things where there are fewer than 10 copies where 1 turns up at least, right? So that was another thing that's always been a little bit sus about this label. And actually what I was going to say about this is that the impetus for this was that if you go on the Sci-Fi label on Discogs, you can see people arguing about it in the discussions. So, maybe once a year I go in there and see if anyone's added to it. Because it's sort of been ongoing for, several years now. And kind of my favorite part of it was that someone in there said, what does Dag Erik Asbjornsen think? Because he's the guy who put out this book back... Fuck. I just dropped a CD. One of the only CDs I still own. But he put out this book back, in the early 90s. This is really sort of the thing that got me obsessed with the shit, just sort of going through this book and looking at all these crazy pictures. And the fact that the font selection was kind of shitty and that only made it more charming, Everything in this thing just looked so obscure and just so weird to me at the time, all these record covers that I just had to have it. So anyway, someone in the comments on this thing said, what did Dag Erik Asbjornsen think? And he actually chimed in and basically said, well, I didn't include that shit in my book, did I? So, yeah, so that would sort of necessitates bringing up the main person who did vouch for it, because of the books that came out in the 90s on the topic, there was Dag Erik Asbjornsen's book, which was first. And then there was one by the Freeman brothers, Alan and, I don't remember his brother's name, but 2 guys named Freeman. And I don't have that book anymore. I used to have it. I don't not have it because it's a bad book. It's very good. Osbjornson's taste is just a little bit closer to mine, frankly. If he says something is awesome, I really want to hear it. And I generally really dig it for whatever reason, right? When the Freeman brothers say that something is great, a lot of times, sometimes it's great, but sometimes I listen to it and go, God, this kind of sounds like just another fucking English prog record, So, but anyway, the Freeman brothers did have them in their book. And it seems that Alan Freeman has kind of been one of the main guys sort of, speaking out in support of this. And, basically, I think vouching might be too strong a word, but attesting to why you might see them as legitimate. You know what I mean? Because, there's apparently a case to be made, so I can't say anything super definitive here. I can only say that I'm not buying it. But I want to feature this shit anyway, because as it turns out, the records are just fucking fantastic. Like, they finally got reissued just over the last 5 years or so by a label out of Spain, I think, called Mental Experience. And, of course, the way they're packaged is all, like, their liner notes and shit like that by Alan Freeman. They're all sort of talking about this stuff and who played on what. And, a lot of it's like, oh, well... Okay, so like this comp is like sort of like extra stuff. There were the 6 original albums, and there were a few comps in the 90s too that had some of these bands on them too. And this one basically compiles the ones that were on those other comps, which is great because I don't want to track all those down. And it's fucking fantastic, just like the other ones. So I'm just sort of sampling through this a little bit as we go. So this is an act called Baal. And the liner notes on this are shit to the effect of, oh, well, this song is probably, this band is probably 2 guys from National Army and, like, the drummer from Spirulina or something like that, right? And, like, that I believe, I just don't necessarily believe it was done in the 70s, So, it's funny because it's so deep in the weeds. Like, how many people give a shit about 70s German rock at all? Probably more now than maybe ever before, right? It's about the weirdness. This is more rocky than a lot of the stuff, too. So it's just such a weird, obscure niche, but you know what I mean? But on the other hand, so it seems implausible that people would, like, try to imitate that and pass some shit off as fake. On the other hand, I would totally do that, And even if I weren't looking to, like, sort of, pull, even if I weren't trying to, like, put one over on people or something like that, the idea of starting a band in the mid-90s to emulate some 70s bands that I really loved, totally plausible, you know what I mean? And the other thing I gotta say about this shit, too, is, I'm calling it a hoax. I'm probably gonna call it a hoax in the video title is a little bit clickbaity thing, but this was never, to my knowledge at least, done as like a scam. You know what I mean? I never saw anyone try to sell one of these things and say, oh, this is a super rare thing and it's $500 because of that, or $1,000 or whatever. These things, when they've been available at all, they've been relatively cheap. These reissue records, they're imports. They probably set you back $30 in the States now. You know what I mean? Assuming they're still around. I haven't checked in a while. But the point is, it's not like a ripoff, you know what I mean? It's a hoax, but it just feels like a good-natured, sort of well-intentioned one. And it's one where I just appreciate the fact that it exists. Like, on the one hand, you see people who sort of, like, some of the people online you see getting pissed about it are like, the records are good. It's just kind of shitty that they're like trying to pass this off as something that it's not, and it's phony for this and that reason. And I kind of love the story. I kind of love the argument. I love the fact that people not only love shit that's so obscure that they want to imitate it, but that they love the obscurity enough. The very fact of the shit's obscurity, they love that enough to, like, make up some sort of, like, story and, like, this whole sort of lore that's, ultimately just fake, I just think that's great. I applaud that. And, like, I kind of don't ever want the truth to come out, whatever it is. You know what I mean? If it were ever, like, definitively proven. If someone came out and said, "Yeah, that was really me on those fucking records. It was fake." You know what I mean? That'd be kind of disappointing. You know what I mean? But on the other hand, if someone actually produced a copy of one of these records and said, "Hey, here's a 45 by the Astral Army that I bought back in 1974, and here it is," that'd be kind of a disappointment too. In a way, it's perfect the way it is. You know? And that's a big part of why I want to talk about this, because it's kind of in the spirit of this channel. You know, it's just sort of appreciating things the way they are. You know what I mean? Because things can be kind of shitty and still be perfect the way they are. And these aren't kind of shitty. I don't think these are kind of shitty at all. I really think they're fantastic. But there's still a lot of sort of mythology, but deliberately perpetrated mythology around them. And I kind of love that too. Like, that whole aspect of it is kind of perfect too. So I consider this whole thing to be a hoax. But it's a hoax that I'm really happy exists. And I want to turn you on to these records because they're really fucking good. So, yeah, and incidentally, the biggest reason why people aren't buying it is because nobody has ever produced one of these records. And, you know, this story goes back to the mid-90s, right? Okay. And the excuses are shit like, well, they were produced in micro quantities, which you've already covered. So is lots of shit. You know what I mean? I mean, Alan over on Let's Talk Metal, he has shit that was only ever a test pressing, you know? And somehow we have copies of that. But we can't find 100 run of some record from the 70s? Come on. Someone would have a copy. Then the other one is they were only sold in like art galleries and shit. And I'm like, yeah, sure, my ass. You know, what art galleries, first of all? But second of all, like it somehow puts it off limits if you say, well, it was sold at art galleries and not record stores. Like, oh, I guess I wouldn't have been sophisticated enough to buy it then. You know what I mean? Every so often you'll see a review by someone championing the shit and, like, you know, claiming that it's real, and they'll sort of be saying, yeah, they'll be acting like it's self-righteous to say the shit's fake. And I'm like, no, it's kind of just like recognizing what's there, but you can still dig the hell out of it. It doesn't take anything away from it at all. I think it makes it better in a way, you know? So anyway, this is Cologne Curiosities, which is sort of the comp. And this is the one where when the Mental Experience one came out, because I never had those other comps in the 90s. They were, I don't remember who put them out now, it's been too long, but they were just sort of miscellaneous, so I remember seeing them around, and a lot of the shit I already had, but then there were a few, like the Astral Army, that I'd never heard of, but, you know, could only buy so much at one time. So having all that shit compiled, you know, on one 2-record set was really nice. It's kind of silly pictures. You know, and it's mostly, you know, it's 7 songs on this thing on a 2-record set, same as Made in Japan by Deep Purple, right? And yeah, some great band names, including what would appear to be Feuerrot or Feuerrote misspelled, which also attests to its authenticity as Germanness, right? Some of the people talk about the German, like, there aren't a lot of vocals on most of this shit, but there's some people talk about, like, English accents, the German vocals. I haven't noticed that so much myself, but I also haven't necessarily listened for it, because I'll put it on intending to listen to it and then sort of get lost and not notice anymore. Anyway, awesome comp. Everything on here is exclusive, and there's nothing on here where, I mean, none of these are off albums that you might find or something like that. This is all that Neil Anderson ever did, whoever Neil Anderson was, right? Or, you know, 10 to Zen, you know, which is who we're listening to right now. This is 10 to Zen. So most of these are a lot more sort of like the cosmic sort of thing, which again, you know, is like when you get into, if you get into the German shit for sort of the cosmic aspect specifically, you know, a lot of it's really kind of just prog rock, and a lot of it's kind of just hard rock. And being German and not English or American, they kind of have their own style and their own idioms. The hard rock tends to be darker, you know what I mean, like Birth Control or Drosselbart or Necronomicon or even Silberbart, some of these bands, you know, Geronimo, they just have sort of a darker feel to them than a lot of the sort of comparably heavy English bands, you know? and the prog bands also tend to sort of have this sort of dark, sort of broodingness to it. You know what I mean? If you listen to a band like Cornucopia or something like that, say, or oh, who else? Electric Sandwich comes to mind. Those tend to be a little bit, just a little bit more sort of ponderous, a little bit more sort of introverted, and just a little bit more like dealing with some serious, heavy shit that a lot of the English stuff, which kind of tends to be sort of lighter and, more sort of jolly and sort of happy, you know what I mean? Like, there's a big difference between a band like Cornucopia and a band like, early Genesis, And it's immediately apparent on the records. What you don't have a whole ton of is shit that really sounds cosmic, like this kind of spacey shit, like with the really heavy synths and that. You have those Cosmic Joker records, which are also sort of rip-off records, even though they're fantastic and you should get them. You have most of the stuff on the Cosmic Couriers label. You have most of Asherah Temple's catalog, at least the early records. But, and there are a few other things. You have Klaus Schulze's solo stuff, which is kind of like that, although sometimes kind of boring. Some Tangerine Dream stuff, especially the early records, you can argue are pretty cosmic too. But there's kind of a limited amount, and so this sort of gave us like a whole bunch more, like a whole new spate that no one had ever heard of before, because it hadn't existed before, right? So all of these tend to be like this sort of a cosmic sound. This is really kind of representative right now, but I'm going to sample through a couple of these. And by the way, if we get an ad put on this thing, look in the copyright notification. I guarantee you, it won't say Pyramid Records claimed it. It'll say Mental Experience or some other label that, is currently managing it. But it's not going to be Pyramid because they don't fucking exist. So this one is probably the darkest of the lot. This is one of the second batch. This is the Nasgol, and I'm actually going to put this on for a minute too, so you can sort of hear this. It's going to be weird because these all sort of take a while to build in that. I want to sample through them a little bit to give you a taste, but it's hard to pick out a song, you know what I mean? Because it kind of tends to be more of these long like jams. It's a kind of music you really sort of have to immerse yourself into, but if you're up for it, man, these records are so worth it. So this one is really like the darkest and the most sort of brooding and the most bass heavy too, actually. I'm going to sort of lay down the needle in the middle of the Temple of Barad-dûr. It's almost had like some Soviet France vibes on this thing. It's almost like ambient, but it's really sort of menacing and kind of dark in a way. It's not quite as dark as like Soviet France or something like that, but it sort of goes in that direction, It's kind of like music for like sitting in a cave in the dark, So, yeah, so there's the cover again. You can decide for yourself how sort of authentic that looks as far as the oldness of it, but I think it's a really fucking cool cover. And I'll be honest, that's part of what drew me into these things too, Back is pretty simple there. The pyramid logo. Or the Mental Experience logo. Yeah, Mental Experience is actually a sub-label from Gerson Records out of Spain. So, yeah, the catalog numbers too, Love it. Yeah, and like here we go. So like the credits on this are Frodo playing drums, percussion, and gong. Pippin, percussion, bells, treated tubular bells, electric guitar, trumpet, Gandalf playing percussion, synthesizer, mini moog, organ, Hammond, electric piano, bass, and guitar, right? I mean, yeah, so if you write a note saying, yeah, well, Frodo played with Pippin in this other side project, maybe. Someone played it. That sort of creak and the sort of like weirdness of it. Yeah, sort of at the other end of the spectrum is this one by the Galactic Explorers. Another great cover, right? They tried a little harder on the back of this one too. Yeah, and it has these liner notes like, the sine wave is one of the most beautiful and efficient forms in nature. Light is a sine wave. The leaves of plants grow in sine wave spirals, like shit like that. Like that's the kind of write-up you want to see on your Cosmic records, right? I mean, 100%. So yeah, and this was just 3 people playing synthesizers, one of which is a Lunatron. So what the hell? I'll fire that one up for a second. So you get the sense of the Nasgol. This is like the noisy and dark one. It's a little bit less musical there than it is in other places, but like if you like that kind of sort of noisy stuff, this never really becomes a noise record, the Nasgol, but it definitely sort of has that kind of quality to it. You know what I mean? That sort of this is the one that sounds the most like they found some shit and they were beating on it. You know, I got to figure out where I put the inner sleeve now. God damn it! I do this every fucking video, don't I? Oh, there it is. Alright, so this is Galactic Explorers, and this one is probably the most mellow of the lot. But there's still a lot going on in it. It's all synth, and it's all sort of cosmic, in a really sort of dreamy way. So again, I'm just going to drop the needle in the middle of Lunarscape, which is the whole side of the record, right? Maybe skip a little the build-up so you can sort of get some of that synth color. It's a lot more sort of, I guess, where Tangerine Dream would go when Tangerine Dream was good, you know? And not doing soundtracks or whatever else that I was never particularly interested in. Lots of sort of looping textures, lots of that kind of layering. And just unusual sounds, you know, which is always something I value in a record, you know? I mean, that's why Slayer's guitars sounded so cool, right? Because there's something weird about him in the color. Or you can say the same thing about Queen. Well, I love it in a fucking synth, too, man. If the Galactic Explorers can pull it off, I don't care if they were a fake band, man. I'm all in. Yeah, these are mostly like really good middle of the night records. Yeah. Probably the one that's the most similar to that one is this one by the Cozmic Corridors. Which is really one of my this might be my favorite of the lot, but it's really hard to pick one over the others. This one is also mostly, you know, a lot of organs, a lot of really primitive sounding organs on this one. You know, my principal association with this one is I used to have Mormon missionaries over from time to time, like back in like the 90s and shit. If I didn't have something to do, you know, they call you on the phone or whatever, or kind of knock on the door and be like, oh yeah, come on in, let's argue about religion for a while, you know, sure. I remember one time I had him over and I put this on. It was just like, you know, sort of like this, but with like an organ sort of more forward, not quite as subdued as this, a little bit more sort of up front, but not like in your face. Just like if you sit back, you'd be like, yeah, that's some kind of weird shit we're listening to, you know? And, yeah, listen to it and I was asking questions about like, religion, that sort of thing. I actually called, you know, there's like the hotline you can call the LDS church, you know. And this is before I really knew how the missions work. That, you know, they sort of send out teenagers on missions when they, you know, turn 17 or 18 or whatever, when they graduate high school, I think. But I actually called and asked if I could get some more experienced missionaries. I was like, yeah, I'm trying to ask them these questions and shit, and they don't have anything. They're just trying to show me pictures of Jesus in this book. I'm like, I don't care about that. I want to talk about the pearl of great price. You know, that's where the weird shit is, you know. Explain that to me, you know. Yeah, so anyway, the Cosmic Corridors, similar sort of vibe. Again, very spacey. This one is probably the most like rock one. And this one almost, this is Temple, and this almost vibes out like a, not like a Killing Joke record. But what I'm trying to say about this one is that when I was really, like earlier this year in 2023, when I was like really wanting to hear a bunch of shit that was like sort of punk stuff, but like sort of the weird stuff. You know, like the Cleveland stuff, but maybe not necessarily quite that sort of underground sounding. If I'd had this record, if I were just discovering this record then, it would have really fucking scratched the itch. And this is ostensibly from 75 or 76, so a little on the early side for that sort of thing, but not necessarily. But again, the weirdness is on full display. Even though it's a really different sort of quality, it's not like quiet and subdued like that last one, you know? This is just like the full package for me, man. It's like it got a great beat. The backing vocals, sort of the way they're used is awesome. The effect on the disc vocals, I love it all, man. Or after they go heathen, the wow, awesome. Like this is almost a little bit ham-fisted, you know what I mean? It's almost too much, but I think it stays just on the right side of that line, and on the right side of that line is fucking perfection, man. So this one does get a little bit spacier in places, but this is pretty representative of what this one sounds like. I would imagine this would be the most accessible one to my audience. You know, if you've been watching my channel a lot, you probably really dig Temple. But you probably dig some of the weird shit, too. Oh, feet are falling asleep here. I'm rambling longer than I expected to. I thought this was going to be a short video. I just have so much personal history with these records. I've been like a fan of the shit for 20 years, you know? Almost 30 years, shit. They're not quite that old yet, though. So this next one, I mentioned in a recent video that I didn't always take the shrink off like diligently. Yeah, this is one where I didn't do it. But it also isn't bending the cover up, so I'll do it soon. But check out that fucking foil cover there. This is the Golem record. This is the only one that had another issue that I'm aware of. There was an earlier version of this, other than the CD that came out in the 90s, on the Klimt label, which on Discogs I think is hilarious. It's listed as an unofficial release, and I'm like, compared to what? Compared to the original that doesn't exist? Yeah, sure. It's an unofficial one. I'm sure that Willy Berghoff is gonna come after you on that, right? So yeah, this one is probably the jammiest one. Like if you're an Asherah Temple fan, this might be the first one. This might be the easiest one to get into. I do think it's a little bit more structured than Asherah Temple tends to be. Like I think the best Asherah Temple record is probably Schwingungen, because I feel like it's the one that coheres the best. You know, I like them all, right? Like Join In and the first one I can totally hang with. I even like, you know, the one with Timothy Leary, even though that was really kind of a gimmicky, kind of corny record by comparison. But this one has a lot of that sort of cosmic vibe, a lot of that sort of jamminess, and when it settles into a groove, its heaviest rock song was the very last one called The Returning, which just settles into like sort of a main like riff, which is heavy, and then sort of improvises around it. Just a really satisfying record. But I'm going to throw this on for a minute too. Let's listen to a minute of The Returning. And then we'll talk about the last one, which is going to be the Pyramid record. Yeah, the Golem one might be the one that I've actually listened to the most, because when I had this on CD, I played it a lot. I actually wanted to do The Returning in this band that I was in briefly at the time. It wasn't really all that serious, but like, if we were just hanging out jamming a little bit or something, I'd be like, let's play The Returning, you know? We actually had a song of our own that was kind of a rip-off of it. Ugh, I have to get up and some other things. Oh, look at that. I hit the groove just right. I wasn't even trying very hard. Sort of a basement rock vibe there, you know. And the record's called Orion Awakes. I don't think I mentioned that, but it's a great album title if you're looking to get my attention, right? So the last record in the series that I'm going to show, it was in the second batch of the original ones when they came out in the 90s, is this one, which was actually, I was kind of wondering how they're going to do it on record, because on CD it was just one long track. So they cut it in half to get it on two sides, but it's the Pyramid record. You gotta love the, like, you know, the Central American thing with the disco ball behind it. I mean, fuck, dude. And this one is probably the most psychedelic one of the lot. It's sort of like the Galactic Explorers and the Cosmic Corridors rolled into one with a little bit of extra weirdness thrown in on top, which may make it sound like it's the best of the lot. I wouldn't necessarily say that, though. It's just kind of different. I probably like all three pretty close to equally, with Cosmic Corridors maybe edging them out. I like, I thought it was this one. And the hype sticker of one of these says, "Do not listen to Alone in the Dark." And, like, I think this is all music that's exactly perfect to listen to at Alone in the Dark, or with a friend in the dark is fine, too. And if you have a couple candles or a lava lamp, that's totally fine, too. Hell, if you have the lights on like I do right now, it still sounds pretty fucking good. But yeah, that's the most psychedelic one. To call any of these prog would already be kind of weird. It's, And these records aren't really psychedelic records in the way that, you know, you think of psych rock as being. They are definitely cosmic, but you really wouldn't confuse any of these bands for the Cosmic Jokers either, you know. And, yeah, what they really are is just sort of their own thing, their own little sort of snapshot in time, even if people are arguing what time that was exactly. And I think they're probably fake, but I think they're absolutely fantastic. So, yeah, 7 records that I was really, counting the comp, that I was really, really happy to see come around. And so, if you like old German shit, or if you're just interested in weird shit, or if you don't give a crap about any of that, but you just want to hear something you haven't heard before, all these records have very high recommendation from me. Yeah, they're really all great. Some are easier to get into than others. Like, this is a pretty easy song to get into, right? But they're all worth, you know, turning off the lights, laying down on the couch and just listening to and taking them in. It'll sort of wash over you and remind you how great music can be. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I had to say today. Yeah, there's some other records I was thinking about showing, but it's already a half-hour fucking video, so we're going to let it go. Thanks for watching. Always appreciate it. And yeah, I haven't uploaded a lot lately, by the way, but I've been streaming on Saturday nights, so I don't expect that to become a regular thing because, like, I'm lazy and shit. But hopefully those will be giving you a couple laughs in the meantime between regular videos. So thanks for watching. I always appreciate it.